is the Jake for the State podcast, and this is the call for every red-blooded, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriot to prepare yourself, take your position, stand your ground, and advance the cause of freedom. Let's go.
So anyway, I'm on a rant, so I'm going to
turn
it to you.
I appreciate that. So, so the key differentiator, especially when we're talking about the libertarian mindset or values, is whether or not that affects somebody else. And so, I feel like, and I'm gonna preface this by saying that I am a Christian. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not an atheist or anything like that. But understanding that there is a difference between setting law based off of what we believe to be morally accurate, and what the government should actually be involved in. When it comes to libertarianism, the question is, does it affect somebody else or is it just affecting me? Yep. Okay, so when you talk about rape or theft or murder or things like that, that is something where your choice is negatively impacting somebody else in a non-consenting way. Right. Okay, so absolutely there should be laws about those things, right? I mean, there's absolutely no question there. But when it comes to things like prostitution, just as an example, or sex work, mm-hmm. or drug use, or things like that. Gambling. Mm-hmm. Those are things where consenting adults are participating. Or, gay marriage, things like that. Right. It's a situation where it's two consenting adult individuals that are deciding to make a choice that doesn't negatively impact anybody else. Yeah. And that's where I think that the government needs to stay out of those situations, because it's almost in the past made things worse. And when you go back historically, we talk about foundations, there weren't laws against those things back then. We've created those since then. So if we try to go back to the very basic of laws, and I'm a big proponent for the 10th Amendment too, in that the federal government, you handle the Constitution. Anything outside of that, that's our job here.
Absolutely. Exactly.
And keeping it small and local. But that's where we got muddies, is we're like, well, I don't think that gambling is good, so I'm going to say there should be a law against it. Or I don't think that, two men should be able to marry each other, so I'm going to make a law against it. And I think that's where we did the wrong thing, is we're trying to make laws in place of things where we have consenting individuals that are doing something that actually doesn't negatively impact anybody else.
Right. And I lean in that direction. Mm-hmm. The question I have is does the government have an interest in protecting some moral standards in the interest of society, not caving in on itself, And so if we start saying, what are the negative impacts of gambling, for instance, and what does that do to the overall economy? And so if we open it up and now everybody is gambling, and like you said, I mean, there is hypocrisy here where we have legal gambling, we're taking taxes from it, but only these certain people can have casinos, these people can't. Mm-hmm. And so I despise that hypocrisy, but and I'm not saying one way or the other right here concerning gambling, but just using it as an example of how might it affect the overall economy. And if you look at case studies in other places, are there examples of places? Well, I'm thinking about even with, and we can talk about this with cannabis, with Colorado. Has that improved the overall state, or has it hurt it? And I've heard both. I've heard people on both sides saying, it has caused a greater slum area in downtown Denver because of, marijuana being a gateway drug and things like that. But then overall, has it increased freedom and opportunity and, tax benefits from it, and farming and different things that could also come from opening up the boundaries of cannabis, for recreational use in addition to medical. So, it's easy to just draw a line and say, well, it's easy. Just we're a Christian nation. These things are wrong, therefore they should be illegal. I don't necessarily take that point, because I value freedom. Mm-hmm. And
the greatest gift we were given was choice.
Yes, exactly. And so I believe God wants us to be free, in that it's on the church to go out. If we believe these things are right and wrong, it's on us to go out, evangelize and care and love and disciple. And that's not the government's role.
Absolutely.
And so I do believe these are important, but it's not the government's job. But then when I think about like abortion, I believe that life begins at fertilization, that this is not there's a body within a body. And so in the same way, it's the state's job to protect life, at least say, it's wrong to murder. Well, if there's a body within a body and it's, you're killing that body within your own body, that's pretty close to murder. If not, so because of how I define life, and because I believe we must protect life, because if we loosen that moral boundary of preserving life, then it opens the door to things like euthanasia, and I think it could just spiral way out of control if we minimize the value and the sacredness of life itself, and I think that starts in the womb. But tell me your thoughts on that with abortion.
Yeah, so I always go into it, and the libertarian idea most of the time is that there are good faith arguments on either side. And so that's why the Libertarian Party actually removed abortion altogether from its platform. So that way it's like,
I don't even want to talk about it.
you guys figure out what your stance is, and that way the candidates or the individuals can have whatever stance that they feel. Because, again, just like with anything else, there are libertarians that believe that the NAP, which is the non-aggression principle, which is one of the things that are kind of like our pillars, falls into abortion and not. So abortion, in my personal opinion, is one of those tricky areas, okay? So when we think, I like to think of it in a couple different areas. When we think back historically, and we talk about like, oh, well, it's not in the Bible, but the reason it's not in the Bible is because it wasn't a thing, and this, that, and the other. If you really think down to many, many years ago, whenever a baby was born that was not wanted, or a baby was born that had like severe deformations or stuff like that, they just killed the baby outright after the fact. I mean, that was common practice in order to preserve, bloodlines, and to make sure that, there was nothing that was passed down. So it was actually even more grotesque back then than, we deal with now. And now we have ways to medically, stop pregnancies. But I think that it's more like, I personally have battled. I was pro-life at one point. I've battled with it. And I think that it comes down to the thought process of which life is more important. Are we talking about the value in the life of the mother or the life of the unborn fetus? And I think that's where it kind of gets tricky, because there's so many gray areas. I don't think, like, if one of my daughters were to have become raped, especially when they were younger, I think it would be horrendous, because it's not like a pregnancy is just like nothing changes about you. You just pop out a baby and it's fine. Like, it changes your hormones. It changes your body. I've heard stories of like professional collegiate athletes that got raped and then ended up being pregnant. And so they were not allowed to obviously be in their sport anymore because they're pregnant. Oh yeah. And I mean, it's not a black and white area. I like to give a personal example of my own. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a breast cancer survivor. And then my children, I had all via C-section. So I've had 3 C-sections. And then after I had my last one, they're like, we don't think that you should probably have any more children, because we've cut you open so many times. It would be very risky for your life and for the life of the baby. And then I also had breast cancer on top of that, which causes its own set of issues. Yeah. Okay. So I got a tubal. So I got my tubes tied, which, because of the way that things are set up in the state of Oklahoma, it was not easy to do. I lived in Ardmore at the time. Mercy Hospital doesn't agree with any kind of birth contraception. So I had to do I couldn't even have the tubal done while I was cut open there in the surgery center. Wow. I had to do a whole outpatient surgery afterwards just to get my tubes tied. Right. But as you've seen, there are people who end up getting pregnant after tubals because our bodies heal themselves. And if I were to become pregnant somehow, even though I've done the right things, I've gotten a tubal done, right. I was medically advised not to have a baby anymore. The way that our legislation is run right now, I would be forced to carry that baby until it's actually killing me before I'd be able to have an abortion. And that's way too extreme. Now, do I think that, people should be able to have late-term abortions just because they don't feel like being pregnant? Absolutely not. But I do feel like there are tons of gray areas. Situations where you have a infant that is probably not going to be viable, like half their brain is missing. The way the law's written, if their heart is beating, regardless of anything else, right. So you have a mother that's carrying a child that they know isn't going to live, that you're going to force them to carry that baby to term. Like, there's just so many other things that it involves. IVF, things from that, that I think anybody can agree that nobody wants abortions or wants to have these issues. But I think that instead of focusing on let's keep women healthy and protected, and let's address, like you've been mentioning this whole time, let's address the cause of these issues, why these things are happening, so that way we can reduce the amount of abortions instead of saying, nope, no abortions, because there are tons of valid reasons why someone might need to end a pregnancy outside of just, how a lot of times people like just to think they're just women that are floozies and just out getting pregnant. It's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, it is, and this is definitely an area where I am on the extreme right, you know, and so I, ran as an abolitionist. I believe in that ideology, and it just starts with the premise that life is sacred. When does life begin? We have to do everything we can to protect it, and so. But I appreciate the complexity of the issue, and I appreciate having the conversation. That's what we have to have, is the ongoing conversation about it. So when you think about cannabis, again, government involvement in it, should it be recreational? I felt like on a few things, this being one of them, that the governor has kind of avoided it and kind of defers to the legislature to do something down the road instead of having to deal with it right now. So what is your stance on recreational marijuana?
Yeah, so I think that there should be no problem with having recreational marijuana. Not to be cheesy, it's literally a plant. I can't remember the comedian that says it's a plant and it grows, and if you set it on fire, there might be some effects. But it's just one of those things where it literally is. Yeah. It is no different than tobacco or alcohol, in my opinion. All of those things do things to you. Alcohol is more dangerous in a lot of ways, and again, and this is things that I have first level seen than a lot of stuff. So saying it's like a gateway drug, I don't agree with that, because of the fact that you either have personality traits that make you more prone to addiction and to impulse control, or you don't. Right. So it has nothing to do with the drug. It has to do with the person. And you can develop that through alcohol. You can develop that through anything else. And so I do think that, like we see with alcohol, if we get government out of the way and not even have it be something, there's some people that don't believe in drinking. There's some people that do. There's some people that drink too much. There's some that do it just socially. And we just allow for our moral compasses and our communities to dictate what probably is too much and what isn't. And I think that should be the same thought process applied to cannabis.
Yeah, awesome. Well, man, there's so many things we could go on.
Oh, like I said, we could sit here for hours.
Oh, I know,
this could
exactly.
be like a 10-part series.
I just want to do at least one more.
Yes.
Education.
Yes.
So this was a hot button topic last session. I believe it was a huge driver in the campaign against me to unseat me, is because of my position on vouchers and my opposition to the bill that the governor supported, that the leadership supported. And so I did not like the idea of vouchers because of not just the potential, but the real government foothold in private schools. So I don't want government in private schools or in homeschooling. I like the idea of competition for public schools, but I think that we do have competition, and we should look at other ways that we make it possible for the poor and the economically disadvantaged to be able to break out of the public school system if they wish. I don't think that well, let's start there. What do you think about the voucher idea? Yeah,
I honestly, I was surprised when I saw that you voted no against it, just because of the fact of how conservative you are, and that whole group was very pro-voucher. So I am supportive of vouchers, but not in the way that we have been trying to push vouchers from the Republican side. So my daughters, as I mentioned earlier, have high-level autism.
Yes.
And they utilize the Lindsay Nicole Henry grant, which is the closest thing that we have to a voucher system.
My daughter does too.
Oh, really? There we go. And it literally has been a game changer.
I actually had a bill to expand the Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship. I think that it works great because it's limited in who it's offered to, and public schools have the opportunity first to offer these services, but when they can't offer the services and help them, then they have the option to go somewhere else with this voucher. And so, are there potential issues? Yeah, there are potential issues. But I think that offering vouchers widespread across the state to every kid presents a lot more problems. So, again, there's complexities to this. And I'm not saying I'm completely right on any of these issues, but I'm very guarded when we're growing government.
Right. No, and I can absolutely appreciate that. But where I think vouchers help move us closer, and like I said, I'll explain my version of vouchers here in a second, is that if we can remove the thought process that everybody is forced to put this bucket of money into a system that only goes to public schools, and you don't have a right to take your child and their money to a different school or whatever, because, again, these are our children and we know what's best for our own kids, right? And every child is different. It's not one size fits all. But I do think that holding school districts accountable are important. Individual schools are important. So if we allow the decisions to be not made at the State Board of Education or Federal Board of Education and be brought down to a local school level, and then in conjunction with that, have it to where your child has a dollar amount above their head. If you're rural, that dollar amount is bigger. If you're lower income, that dollar amount is bigger. And I'd even be willing to say the system that we've been kind of talking about that I think would work is that it stays in public schools. You can't take it to a private school with the exception of a Lindsay Nicole Henry Grant situation. And then so you can move from one school to the other, and the money follows your child, stays within public schools, but then it allows for competition and accountability. So for example, I live in Edmond, okay? And so I have 4,000 kids. And so my 2 stepsons and my youngest son all go to public school in Edmond. Edmond has great schools, right? But there's still even things wrong within Edmond schools. Right. So my 11-year-old, he has, since he could talk, pretty much says he wants to be an engineer. He does sports and is an amazing athlete, but he does that as a backup plan in case he cannot make it as an engineer. I'm telling you, this kid, it's crazy. So he wanted to go to class in School of Advanced Studies because he wanted harder work. So that way, his goal is to get an MIT. That kid has strong goals.
Love it.
Okay. So when we decided to move him from Edmond schools to class in SAS, both public schools, those dollars that are associated with him should move with him to that school. Yeah. They're both still public. Okay. And follow them. So that way, when we have schools that are not performing well for their kids, it puts their feet to the fire to start performing better and offering services that are important to the kids in that community. Because in rural schools right now, yes, they might only have one school option. But if the parents know that, hey, this school is failing us and they're not doing anything about it because they know they're the only school and we have nothing else to do, well, guess what? There might be a charter school then that pops up there that their kids' schools can then go to that's still public and will have that more of that accountability. And that's where I think that vouchers would be valuable. I don't want to have public schools, crumble. I don't want any of that to happen. But I do want there to be more accountability to schools. When we talk about teachers, I know tons of teachers. I don't know a single one that left the profession purely because they weren't making enough. It's that and respect. That respect comes from legislators. That respect comes from their principals and their peers and the parents. And so being able to, but most of it was from principals and the legislators. Internal dynamics. Mm-hmm. And so if the teacher knows that, hey, I can go to this next school and they're offering to pay me better, treat me better, it holds more accountability. And that's what I would like to see because we have great teachers. We have parents that want better for their kids. Every child is different. And so we need to allow the schools to make changes and moves and have accountability to be able to adapt as needed.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think that there is an issue with sexualizing our children in schools?
So, yes and no. Do I think that we are sexualizing children in general? No. Like I said, I've got kids ranging from 9 to 17. And I think that this media spin that they're trying to talk to, about pornography to our 6-year-olds. I don't think that that's, at least not in Oklahoma. I know that there are some pockets in other parts of the country where crazy stuff's happening, but in Oklahoma, I don't see that happening. Now, are there books available at the library that talk about certain topics that, if you're more conservative, you may not, appreciate? Absolutely. But that's where we as parents, we have to take accountability for what our children are exposed to. We can't keep putting the responsibility on other people. And one example that I like to see, because again, I'm a parent, and so I know these parents. I've coached their kids. I've seen these, at PTA meetings. There is a strong percentage of these people that are the most upset that I hear their children talking to my child on Xbox using worse language and watching worse things on YouTube than what they're saying is, in a middle school book. Okay, so it's definitely we need, the accountability starts at the home. The accountability 100%. Starts with the parents. I can only control so much, even whenever they're young. The older they get, and when they go to college and high school, it's going to be even worse what they're exposed to. But it's up to us as parents to set the moral foundation to our family and our home, so where I feel confident that my children, that I've raised, my two daughters, my two sons, my ex-husband and I have raised our children in a way that I feel 100% positive that they will make the good choices because we've set that foundation with them. They're exposed to things. They know not to repeat it. They know that some kids say stuff they shouldn't, and that's it. And we have to stop putting the accountability in other people and know that the accountability is ours to raise our children the way that we want them to be raised.
Yes, totally agree. We have to, it all starts at the home. Mm-hmm. What do you think about SEL? Social emotional learning.
So that's tricky too. So we've created this system, and this is where we talk about more government involvement, right?
Yeah.
In theory, what they're trying to teach the children, I agree with the concept of it. But it goes into the situation of, but is it supposed to be the school's job? Is that their role to do that? It should be my role as a parent. But then we do have parents that aren't doing that for their children, and that's causing their children issues. So it's like a vicious circle of problems. But again, it comes down to, I think that's where we talk about decisions being made local and small. Because if we have a school district or we have a school that is in a community where the parents aren't having those conversations and the parents collectively are like, yeah, we don't want to deal with that. We want the school to teach those things. Then that's where the school choice and freedom comes into. Then all those kids and those families, their kids can go to that school where they've said that they want to talk about that, and that's cool. But then when we have, we should have the opportunity, and this is what happens, I believe, with a lot of private schools, is that you have a lot of like-minded parents that know we have these conversations at home. We have these ways that we handle things. So we don't want that in our school because it's not necessary because we've done what we're supposed to do as parents. So that's where one of those things are tricky because it's not their role. It's not that I have a problem at all with what they're trying to teach the children, but we should be teaching that as parents. It shouldn't be them.
Yes, exactly. Well, one more thing on education. What do you see could be done to improve test scores, to improve academic performance? We believe that is the primary function of public education, is the academic results and truly preparing people for the workforce, preparing them so they can go to college if they choose. Ranked at the bottom of the nation. I know that in the recent debate with Stitt and Joy, they were going back and forth. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. Joy was blaming Stitt because he wasn't supporting more funding. We need more funding and more support for teachers. And Stitt was putting the blame on her for she's been in charge of public schools. And so basically saying the buck stops with her. What do you think would be a great solution for improving test scores and academic performance in our schools?
So, first of all, I hate the way we do tests. Okay? We stress our children out doing all of these standardized tests every single year, and instead of actually teaching children to learn, we're teaching kids the test.
Yeah.
And that's not the way to do things. And I feel like it's absolutely important, obviously, when they get into high school, and you do worry about the PSATs when you're a junior because that helps you get placement and things like that. But I feel like there's better ways to measure the success of a school outside of what your test scores look like.
100%.
And not to mention that, too, is the test scores are, you're testing on your language arts skills, you're testing on, math and science, but we're really making children feel their value on what they can give their communities based off of their test scores. A perfect example, again, I'm going to go back to one of my daughters. So she has been so stressed out about the ACTs that she thinks that if she studies whole future hinges on whether she's going to be successful or not on these. She studies, I kid you not, for like an hour out of an ACT book every single night. And she's, obviously she's autistic, and because she just struggles with testing in general because she needs, even with extended time, even with her accommodations, because it takes her more time to process. But she's so gifted in other areas. In geography, And she said that's what she wants to go to college for is geography. This girl, like since she was 2, she could tell you if she could tell me when I was going the wrong way down the highway, going somewhere. But there's not tests for that, right? So we're making our kids feel discouraged because they're not testing well in areas that are not permitted to them. And so for me, I would love to see us get rid of most of the tests that we're doing to these kids, these standardized testing each year. You can tell internally how your kids are doing. You can see by graduation rates. You can see by all these other things without having to spend so much time on tests and studying for tests and teaching children how to test. If we could, again, get all of that out of it, and just let them learn.
So then,
I would homeschool my kids. If I wasn't the breadwinner in our family and I could stay home, and I would absolutely in a heartbeat stay home and homeschool my children.
I know. We homeschooled ours for years. We recently got our oldest into a private school, and we still homeschool our youngest. But I totally agree. That's what we do. We keep the learning fluid, find out where their strengths and proclivities are, and cater towards that while also helping their weaknesses. But yeah, the idea of running kids through a cookie cutter system is not in their best interest. And so then, that begs the question, I'll end with this one, is the idea of our relationship to federal funding with the school system, and how is that driving the requirement for testing and other things that are connected to federal money. Yeah.
So I know that Ryan Walters has gotten a lot of flack for his comments on removing federal education, and I think that it has to do with a misunderstanding of what that means. So that's actually one of the few things with Ryan that I agree with is the removing of federal funds.
Yes,
but I wish he had a marketer working for him to educate better on what that means, because people immediately were like, well, that pays for our free breakfast and free lunch programs that we get to offer, and that helps fund special education. So you don't care about, I'm like, just because the federal government isn't making us do certain things doesn't mean we magically don't care about these kids anymore.
100%. Exactly.
What it does, though, is it costs us almost more money to adhere to the guidelines that they set in order to receive this funding than if we just wouldn't take the funding at all.
Exactly.
And it gives us more freedom to make choices that we need. Anytime that anybody who's been in a nonprofit space or a space where grants and stuff are involved, there's always like, if you want this money, then this much can be used here and this much can be used here, and then you need to do this and you need to do that. And, you have situations where, Oklahoma is extremely diverse. Edmond versus Altus versus Antlers are completely different situations. So why are we, if we have a grant that requires, let's say 20% be used on physical fitness or nutrition, I'm just throwing something random out. Okay. And Edmond, right? We have multiple YMCAs, we have tons of sports groups. There is a plethora of ways for our kids to stay physically active. The schools are relatively new and nice, and they don't need that funding there. So because they have to, though, in order to get the rest of this money, we're creating things that we don't need to create. Meanwhile, we could use that money in areas that we do need, like maybe hiring specialized teachers, maybe, different stuff like that. And then you have situations like Antlers where I don't even think they have a YMCA. They don't have any of those types of programs that we have here in the metro, so they should be able to spend more money on those areas and, letting the communities decide what's valuable for them. Then you have areas like Pryor where they've got Google and things like that, where they're getting lots of tech donations. So why are we making them spend a certain dollar amount on tech when they have support from businesses there, and they could take that money and repurpose into other parts of their budget that they need it? We're not allowing the schools to be creative, and that's why when we look at private schools versus public schools, the reason that private schools perform better, like if you ask any parent, I don't know of anybody that if they're like, you can go to a private school for free or go to public school, and they're going to pick the private school because they can do what they need for the kids without all of the government hoopla. And if we allowed our public schools to try to do that as best as possible, I think that we would see a completely different situation for our children.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I'm all for getting off the federal money, both in education, healthcare, across the gamut, just because there's always strings attached. You're always forced into a mold. And I think if there's one thing we need to reclaim, it's our state sovereignty, and that we will determine the destiny of Oklahoma and not Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
And so completely agree with you there. Man, I really appreciate your time. I know we've covered a lot, and it seems like just scratching the surface.
I know.
So we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
I hope everyone out there listening was able to finish this whole podcast. We're going to try to break it up in a couple different sections so that you can listen to part 1 and part 2, break it up a little bit. But it's important that you know what your options are. Again, that's why I wanted to have this interview with Natalie, is so you know who's actually running and give you a platform to say, this is why I'm running, who I am, and what my top issues are, what I believe are the solutions for the state. And then you make an informed decision. So I'm not one that just checks all the Republican boxes because they're Republican. I've spent too much time in office now, and it doesn't take a lot of time to find out that just because they have an R beside their name, that doesn't mean they align with everything that you believe is right for the state. And so there's so many things that we talked about that I'm in complete agreement with. And like I said, I would consider myself libertarian in a lot of ways just because I believe in minimal government, limited government. So I hope that you all could hear exactly what she's saying and that you can make an informed vote. That's what I want, is for everyone to make an informed vote. Vote your convictions, not just the Republican Party because you're a Republican, or a D because you're a D, but an
or L because
vote.
you're an L.
Or no, because you're not. Exactly. Are there any final thoughts you'd have for people listening? Where can they find out more about you? And I'll let you close it out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So you can go to my website, which is electnatalieBruno.com. I have tons of information on there. As I mentioned earlier, I tried to make it to where any issue that I felt like was a strong issue in the state, I put it out there, even if you won't necessarily agree with me. I would rather you know exactly where I stand on something than be one of those people that seems to flip-flop on issues. That being said, there's also links to the Libertarian Party platform, as well as the Oklahoma Libertarian Party platform, so you can learn more about the party in general. Reach out to me. It sometimes is delayed on when I can respond to you, but I do try to have either myself or someone from my team respond to every single message because, again, there might be something that's important to you that wasn't covered somewhere. And I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask hard questions and get legitimate answers because I believe that candidates should do more of answering the actual questions instead of dancing around it. So so I appreciate you allowing me to come on here and speak to your followers and let them know a little bit more about the Libertarian Party and about myself.
I love it. Well, I appreciate your time and appreciate you guys staying tuned in. This is Jake for State podcast, so you can go to jakeforthestate.com and find out more about this podcast and the things we're doing here. So God bless you all. We'll see you next time.